Well, hello, everybody. I trust that you're enjoying a holiday season, especially if you live here in the United States between the two holidays at Thanksgiving and Christmas. It's definitely one of my favorite times of the year. It's so beautiful. And wouldn't it be phenomenal if we were to get some snow to add some icing on the cake? Anyway, the episode that I'm going to do with you today comes by way of popular demand. I've been asked by several people over the last couple of months to cover the topic: are today's Jews, especially Jews from my own background, known as Ashkenazi Jews, which is those of us who lived for most of the past few centuries in Europe, okay, in places like Germany, Poland, Russia, France, are those of us who belong to that subclass or subgroup of Jews known as Ashkenazi Jews, descendants of Israel. And this is an important question because the modern state of Israel was founded largely by Ashkenazi Jews, and therefore were accused of being frauds. In other words, interlopers, a foreign invasion into the Middle East, not authentic, and therefore illegitimate. Now, I'm going to play for you a sample of what I would call the perfect exemplar of her generation, Generation Z, making such an allegation against those of us known as Ashkenazi Jews. Take a listen to her, and then I'm going to address her points one by one.
Zionism is the highest form of white supremacy, when you can colonize their land, take all of their resources, eradicate the indigenous people, and then turn around and have the audacity to cloak yourself in their identity while simultaneously invoking God's name and saying that He wants this for your people after you just committed an ethnic cleansing. That is the highest form of white supremacy.
There are thousands like her on TikTok, on X. She calls herself Books Behind Borders. And in this brief clip of her that I showed you, she reads off a litany of fallacious, absolutely the inversion of truths. Every single thing that she said from the very beginning, that Zionism is the ultimate expression of white supremacy, to the charge that Israel is guilty of committing genocide, or the words that she used, ethnic cleansing. And lastly, that we, the Jews, are in gross error for thinking that our God is pleased with what's happening. She's wrong on all three counts. Now, I have already dedicated entire episodes concerning whether Israel is guilty of having committed genocide or ethnic cleansing in this most recent war against Hamas in Gaza. The answer of which is no. And I'm not going to waste any time in this video rehashing that, because I've spoken about it in other episodes, nor am I going to waste any time speaking about where God stands on this issue, because I've devoted not only entire episodes, but an entire series called Making Sense of the End Times, in which I deal with the biblical point of view, or what God, or let's say where God stands on this very issue of the rebirth of a Jewish state in our day, and the stumbling block that it poses to the world at large. Now, in short, the answer, if you don't want to watch the entire series that you can find in my archive called Making Sense in the End Times, in short, it's clear for those of us that know the Bible from cover to cover that Yahweh, the God of the Bible, is the one who's responsible for this rebirth of a Jewish state in our day, and the regathering of the Jewish people from the four corners of the globe back to that reconstituted Jewish polity. So I'm not going to get into all that. But what I didn't cover in previous episodes, and therefore will spend the rest of this episode talking about, is related to her charge that we, the Jews, particularly my group known as Ashkenazim, are not real Jews, but actually a foreign intrusion of European colonialists, okay? That were Europeans that conquered the Middle East and were just pretending to be descendant from ancient Judah as an excuse or to lend credibility to the Zionist project. So that's what we're going to begin with, and that's going to take us through this whole episode. So, where's the truth on this? Are Ashkenazi Jews like myself Semites, descendants of the ancient Israelites? And this is an easy one to answer because there's overwhelming scientific evidence that indeed we, the Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, despite a little bit of admixture for having lived among Europeans for the last 2,000 years, have still remained at our core Semite descendants of ancient Israel. And I'm now going to just turn briefly to some artificial intelligence to prove that point, or to at least bring that home. And if you want to study any further, you too can go to AI to look up all the pertinent articles. All right, let's do a simple artificial intelligence research here. So I put into my search, or into my inquiry, my DNA results were 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. Do Ashkenazi Jews descend from what today is Israel? And here is the answer. And as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. Yes, genetically, Ashkenazi Jews descend from ancient Israelites who lived in the Middle East in the region of modern day Israel. DNA studies show that the majority of Ashkenazi Jewish DNA has Middle Eastern, specifically Levantine roots. Okay, that's the Levant is the area of modern day Israel and Lebanon, with a significant component also from European ancestry, such as Italian, which reflects their historical migration through Europe. So here I've refined the question and made it less about me and just a general question here. Are Ashkenazi Jews ethnically Semitic, per the accusation that we're not really Semites, but Europeans? In other words, frauds, people claiming to be Semites but are not. So here's the answer to that narrower question. Yes, Ashkenazi Jews are Semitic people, as confirmed by numerous genetic studies that show that they share common ancestry with other Jewish groups and Middle Eastern populations. The term Semitic refers to a group of people native to the Middle East, including ancient Israelites. And the genetic and historical evidence links Ashkenazi Jews to this origin. Claims that they are not Semitic are a modern and often anti Semitic attempt to deny their connection to the land of Israel. Now, as it pertains to the genetic evidence, genetic studies consistently show that Ashkenazi Jews have Middle Eastern origins and are most closely related to other Jewish groups, such as Sephardic Jews. Sephardic Jews are those Jews that spent the bulk of the diaspora in Spain, okay, and then they were kicked out of Spain and scattered around North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, particularly Morocco. Okay, their ancestry is also linked to ancient Canaanites, similar to other Levantine peoples. For the third version of our inquiry into this question, so here's the third version of the question here up top. Are Ashkenazi Jews like myself more related to other Jewish groups, such as Sephardic, which is the group I mentioned that spent the bulk of their diaspora in Spain, and Mizrahi Jews, which are Jews that spent the bulk of the last couple thousand years in places like Iraq and Iran? Or Are Ashkenazi Jews like Steve more related to their Gentile host groups, such as Slavs? And pardon me for the misspelling here, although just know that the English word slave actually does come from the word Slav, such as Slavs, Germans, Poles, French, and the like. And here's the answer. Ashkenazi Jews are more genetically related to other Jewish groups like Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews than to their Gentile host populations. While all Jewish communities have distinct genetic admixtures from the regions they lived in, autosomal DNA studies show a high level of relatedness among all major Jewish groups, indicating a shared Middle Eastern ancestry that predates their diverse diaspora experiences. So there you have it. As it pertains to the DNA of people like myself, known as Ashkenazim, our DNA goes back to a Semitic Near Eastern core. Granted, there's some admixture. I love that it said that there's some Italian in there. Explains my affinity for all things Italy, especially Italian food. But despite the admixture, the evidence bears out that even those of us known as Ashkenazi Jews remain at our core descendants of the ancient Near East, particularly the eastern shoreline of the Mediterranean Sea, known as the Levant, which today is occupied by the modern states of Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and the Palestinian territories. Now, moving on. The next thing we need to explore is how did those European host populations that we just read that we have less genetically in common with them than we do our fellow Jews. In other words, I have more in common genetically with my fellow Jews from Iraq than I do with my Gentile host of Poland and Russia and Germany. The question now I want to ask is how did those Gentile peoples perceive us? Did they perceive us as fellow countrymen? Did the Germans perceive their Jews as fellow Germans? Did the Poles perceive their Jews as fellow Poles? The answer is resoundingly and unfortunately violently, as we know, as it climaxed in World War II, nine being the German negation, or no. Now, nothing demonstrates this more powerfully than two children books that were in popular circulation in Nazi times. And I'm just going to show you both books to show you how the Germans perceived us and how they wished their children to perceive us. So here we go. Our first of the two German children's books that we're going to focus on here. Now, check out this super long word at the beginning. Okay, German as a language, by the way, is known for this in combining what would be several English words into one long German word. So the title in German, and excuse me for messing up the accent here, is I never learned to speak German, although it was required of me to learn how to read German to be able to get a PhD. Because so much scholarship in my field that I studied, which is classics and ancient Jewish studies, were done in Germany before World War II. So to get a PhD at Hebrew U, where I got my PhD, you have to be able to read academic articles and book chapters in German. But I wasn't taught how to speak it, so I'll probably mess up. But here, the title, Der Pudel Mopsch Dackelpinscher, which translates here as the separate English words, the poodle, pug, dachshund, pinscher, the name of that book. And as you can tell by the very name of the book is referring to a mutt. And throughout this children's book, the argument being made by its author is that that's exactly what we, the Jewish people, are. We're mongrels and we're mutts. Okay, we're not a pure race by any means, and certainly not Aryans as the Germans are. So let's open this book. Let's take a look at it because it's quite interesting. Now, check out the cutie here, and he's followed by an even cuter cutie right there. See where I'm circling with the pointer here. Now, I love animals. I love dogs. One of my greatest regrets is that I never had a dog. I just travel too much, and a dog is like a human child. It's not like a cat that can take care of itself. A dog needs to be cared for. But look at that cutie there. I'm already being drawn in as I have a child's heart towards animals. Okay, but we go from this cutie here to something much more sinister. And that's sort of what's so criminal about this book in particular. Okay, the use of this cute imagery here to draw the child reader in. Now, as we flip through the book, we ultimately get to this particular page that I'm interested here. Okay, and let's see if I can enlarge it. This page right here with this picture. Now, it's written in German, but I've taken the time here to translate it. Fortunately for us, the second book that we'll deal with was translated on our behalf into English, but here I had to translate it from the German to the English. So I'm starting right with this sentence here, and I'm going to read. It's important, and just be aware again of this illustration here, which is trying to convey in imagery what I'm reading to you. Now, although the name of the book has to do with dogs, okay, and particularly a mutt, a non-pure breed dog, the language here switches to the animal or creature that we know as chameleons. Okay, so I'm starting right where I lit up here or highlighted here in blue. Chameleons exist not only among animals, but also among people. These are the Jews. Many years ago, the Jews came to us. They were immediately recognizable by their peculiar language. It consisted of Hebrew, Polish, and German words. Everyone who heard these men mumbling immediately said, "They are the Jews." But this did not suit the Jews. They did not want to be recognized. For this reason, they changed their language. In Germany, they suddenly spoke German. In Italy, Italian. In Spain, Spanish. In England, English. And in France, French. Just as the chameleon changes its color is needed so that it can no longer be recognized, so the Jew changes his language. Many people were deceived by this. They believed that the Jew had suddenly become a German, an Italian. They became Spaniards, Englishmen, or Frenchmen. In reality, however, the Jew only changed his language. In his heart, he always remained a Jew. And he will remain a Jew, even if he were to speak several different languages, because a chameleon remains a chameleon and a Jew remains a Jew. The Jews used to wear dirty beards and long sideburns at their temples. They were dressed in a completely soiled black garment called a kaftan. Their bodies were covered in dirt, and a terrible smell emanated from them. Everyone could see at first glance that they were Jews, and whoever couldn't see it could smell it with their nose. But the Jews didn't want to be recognized. For this reason, one day they cut off their beards and sideburns. They went to the bathhouse and washed themselves until they were finally clean. Then they went to the hairdresser, had their hair styled, and they rubbed their bodies with fragrant liquids. Now they were satisfied. The stench, the beard, the dirt, and the smell were gone. Just as a chameleon changes its appearance according to need, So the Jew changed his outward appearance so that he would no longer be recognized. Many people were deceived by this. They believed that the Jew had suddenly become a fellow countryman. In reality, however, the Jew only changed his outward appearance. In his heart, he remained a Jew, and he will always remain a Jew because they didn't know the proverb: a chameleon remains a chameleon, and a Jew remains a Jew. And here's an illustration that one will see if they walk through today's Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. In the very first exhibit room, this picture is prominently shown, conveying the message that I just read, that the Jew, although they wear this mask of a German or an Aryan, behind the mask is that ancient Semite that can't be washed away or changed by any means. No matter how our features may have changed over the couple thousand years that we lived in Europe and experienced some of the admixture that I just read about and that artificial intelligence inquiry into the Semitism of the Jews, despite even some of that local admixture and the evolution of our features, the Jew remains that Semite. Okay, that's what's being communicated in the book that I just read. Okay, and now we're going to move to our second and perhaps the most famous of the two German children's books. This one, thankfully, having been already translated into English for us. Now, this is the more famous of the two children's books, and it's called The Poisonous Mushroom. And while it doesn't resort to imagery of cute dogs or animals to draw the reader in, as you'll see in just a moment, the imagery that it employs is still quite powerful in its endeavor to present us, the Jews, as an entirely other race than that of the Germans, the Aryan, the European. Okay, so let's open the book to get to the part that I'm really interested in here. Okay, which is how to recognize the Jew. Okay, you see that up here at the top above the picture, how to recognize the Jew. And it only takes up here a couple pages, and I'm going to read it to you because it continues the theme that we saw in the previous book about the dog, about the mutt. So starting here at the top. Things are lively in Mr. Berkman's 7th grade boys' class today. The teacher is talking about the Jews. Mr. Berkman has drawn pictures of Jews on the blackboard. The boys are fascinated, even the laziest of them. Emil, the snorer, is paying attention, not sleeping, as he so often does during other subjects. Mr. Berkman is a good teacher, and all the children like him. They are happiest when he talks about the Jews. Mr. Berkman can do that well. He learned about the Jews from life. He knows how to put it in gripping terms, such that the favorite hour of the day is the Jewish hour. Mr. Berkman looks at the clock. It is noon, he says. We should summarize what we have learned in the past hour. What have we talked about? All the children raise their hands. The teacher calls in Carl Schultz, a small lad in the front row. We have talked about how to recognize the Jews. Good, say no more. Little Carl reaches for the pointer, steps up to the board, and points to the drawings. One can most easily tell a Jew by his nose. The Jewish nose is bent at its point. It looks like the number 6. We call it the Jewish 6. Many non-Jews also have bent noses, but their noses bend upwards, not downwards. Such a nose is a hook nose or an eagle nose. It is not at all like a Jewish nose. Right, says the teacher. But the nose is not the only way to recognize a Jew. The boy goes on. One can also recognize a Jew by his lips. His lips are usually puffy, the lower lip often protrudes. The eyes are different too. The eyelids are mostly thicker and more fleshly than ours. The Jewish look is wary and piercing. One can tell from his eyes that he's a deceitful person. The teacher calls on another lad. He is Fritz Muller and is the best in the class. He goes to the board and says, Jews are usually small to mid-sized. They have short legs. Their arms are often short too. Many Jews are bow-legged and flat-footed. They often have a low slanting forehead and a receding forehead. Many criminals have such a receding forehead. The Jews are criminals too. Their hair is usually dark and often curly like a Negro's. Their ears are very large and they look like the handles of a coffee cup. The teacher turns to the students. Pay attention, children. Why does Fritz always say many Jews have bow legs, or they often have receding foreheads, or their hair is usually dark? Heinrich Schmidt, a large, strong boy in the last row, speaks. Every Jew does not have these characteristics. Some do not have a Jewish proper nose, but real Jewish ears. Some do not have flat feet, but real Jewish eyes. Some Jews cannot be recognized at first glance. There are even some Jews with blonde hair. If we want to be sure to recognize Jews, we must look carefully. But when one looks carefully, one can always tell it is a Jew. Very good, the teacher says. And now tell me about other ways to tell Jews from non-Jews. Richard, come up here. Richard Krause, a smiling blonde lad, goes to the board. He says, one can recognize a Jew from his movements and behavior. The Jew moves his head back and forth. His gait is shuffling and unsteady. The Jew moves his hands when he talks. He jabbers. His voice is often odd. He talks through his nose. Jews often have an unpleasant, sweetish odor. If you have a good nose, you can smell the Jews. The teacher is satisfied. That's how it is, kids. You have to pay attention. If you pay attention outside school and keep your eyes open, you won't be fooled by the Jews. The teacher goes to the lectern and turns the board. On the other side, a poem is written, and the children read it aloud. From the face of the Jew, the wicked devil speaks to you. The devil who is everywhere, known as an evil plague. He would be happy and cheerful if again freed from the Jew. So the youth with us must seek to escape from the Jewish devilish grip. Okay, now we'll just continue to flip through the book here. And now you see how the Jewish people are depicted in Nazi-era Germany. Look carefully here at the picture, and you'll see that the Jewish people are definitely depicted as a race other than German, Aryan, white people, or whatever term we want to use for Europeans. Okay, here are the distinctly Semitic and Middle Eastern features of the Jew rendered in this picture. Okay, we continue to flip through the book. Okay, again, checking out the rabbi here, who's standing on what's called the bima of the synagogue, looking down at a book. And again, he is rendered distinctly as non-European, as Middle Eastern, as a Semite. Okay, looking perfectly at home if he were in the Middle East. Okay, we'll continue to flip the page here, pages. Okay, again, check out how this particular Jewish person is rendered in contrast to the Aryan Gentile girls behind him. Okay, the Semite versus the white Aryan girls who are looking at him as an oddity. Flipping again here. Okay, let's see if there's any more. Oh, yeah, check out this guy. Okay, the Semite here, the Semitic Jew, as opposed to the innocent, sweet, refined German maiden. Okay, right there. Continue to flip through here. Ooh, okay, here's the Jewish guy being depicted in contrast to the Aryan children. So look, it's obvious from all the renderings in this book that the Germans are proclaiming that the Jew is something other than a European. He is, despite living for 2 millennia among Europeans, among Aryans, among Germanic peoples, he is and remains that ancient Middle Eastern Semite of old. Well, so much for how our European counterparts saw us over the 2 millennia that we lived among them. And our experience or sojourn in Europe, as everybody knows, ended climactically with the murder of 2 out of every 3 Jews in Europe. Why were we murdered? And it wasn't just the German war machine that killed us. There were collaborators in each and every European country that the Nazis came to. They were more than willing to help the Nazis exterminate the Jews. Why? Because of our purported otherness. We may look white. Look at my blue eyes, folks. I may look European. I may speak a European language as fluently and as elegantly as my European neighbor, but I'm not a European per my European counterpart's opinion. But now we see this incredible irony. This shift is epitomized in the girl, the Generation Zer, that we launched this video with, who accuses people like myself, Jewish Ashkenazim or Jewish descendants of Europe, of being foreign implants in the Semitic Middle East. We are the epitome, at least in her opinion, and in the opinions of tens of thousands, if not more, of people of her generation, the Steves of the world, the Benjamin Netanyahus of the world, the Ehud Baraks of the world, and mentioning the prime ministers of Israel, all of whom came from the same Ashkenazi background as me, were not real Jews. We're Europeans, and we need to go back to Poland, where we came from, to go back to Germany, where we came from. Where we were peacefully living for all these centuries as Europeans until we got it in our crazy heads that we're something other than European, and for no reason just got out of Europe or got up out of our lazy boys there in Berlin, and in some cases walked on foot to Israel, as was the case, I believe, of the parents of Ariel Sharon, okay, another prime minister from that same Ashkenazi background. If I recall correctly, Sharon's parents walked on foot from what today is called Belarus to escape the anti-Semitism and pogroms that were taking place against the Jews of their day. Now, how did we get from the German propaganda that we just saw in the children's books to this modern day propaganda that the Jews, like Steve, aren't real Jews, we're imposters? Well, believe it or not, a lot of it can be founded in the work, or let's say a lot of it is substantiated by these people on a work written by none other than a Jew, a Jewish man by the name of Arthur Kessler, a book called The 13th Tribe. Now, Arthur Kessler published this book back in 1976. Let's take a look at the Wikipedia entry for the 13th Tribe, because it really presents well and quite concisely the thesis of Kessler's book. So, according to the Wikipedia summary, The 13th Tribe is a 1976 book by Arthur Kessler advocating the Khazar hypothesis of Ashkenazi ancestry, the thesis that Ashkenazi Jews are not descended from the historical Judeans and Israelites of antiquity, but from Khazars, a Turkic people who allegedly mass converted to Judaism. Kessler hypothesized that the Khazars, after their conversion in the 8th century, migrated westwards into Eastern Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries when the Khazar Empire was collapsing. Now, just know that Kessler didn't originate this legend of an ancient kingdom called Khazaria converting to Judaism. For the originator of the legend was a 12th century Spanish Jewish philosopher and poet by the name of Judah Halevi, who wrote a dialogue between a rabbi and the king of this people or this kingdom, Khazaria. Now, Khazaria was situated between Muslim Persia to its east and the Byzantine Christian Empire, situated in what today is called Turkey, to its west. And according to Halevi's 12th century dialogue, the rabbi is invited by the king of Khazaria to make a presentation on behalf of Judaism, and he's so successful that the king of Khazaria, rather than converting to either Islam or Christianity, instead converts together with his nobility or aristocracy to Judaism. But even in that 12th century legend, there's no claim that the whole of this kingdom, Khazaria, converted to Judaism. Only the king and his nobility. And Kessler in 1976 runs with that legend but expands it to include the whole of the kingdom converting to Judaism, and therefore not just an elite group of people, but the populace at large. Now, what was his motive in writing this book? Well, again, Wikipedia tells us pretty well and concisely here that Kessler biographer Michael Scammell writes that Kessler told French biologist Pierre de Bray-Ritson he was convinced that if he could prove that the bulk of Eastern European Jews, the ancestors of today's Ashkenazim, were descended from the Khazars, the racial basis for anti-Semitism would be removed and anti-Semitism itself could disappear. Now, that assertion, which we just read in the Wikipedia entry for the book The 13th Tribe, is repeated and obviously chosen by the publisher, if not the author himself, for the back part of the jacket of one of the editions of the book. Okay, so here looking at the back part of the jacket of the book, what happens to anti-Semitism if Jews are not really Semites at all? This book by world-famous author Arthur Kessler represents the culmination of the most astounding feat of historical detective work of our time. In bold, brilliant, enthralling fashion, it proves that the true ancestors of Western Jewry were not Semites, but rather the warrior empire of the Khazars, a mighty power that converted to Judaism in the Dark Ages, and whose subsequent exodus gave birth to the mainstream of the Jewish people as they now exist. And above all, a revelation that profoundly affects both the way that others look at Jews and the way that Jews look at themselves. As it relates to this question, is there any DNA evidence that links the Ashkenazi Jews to Khazars? The answer, as you see highlighted below, is no. DNA evidence does not support a Khazar origin for Ashkenazi Jews. Genome-wide studies have consistently shown that Ashkenazi Jews have a primary Middle Eastern origin with shared ancestry from other Jewish populations. While the Khazar theory has been a subject of debate, modern genetic research shows no significant genetic contribution from the Khazars. Lack of genetic evidence. Multiple studies, including a large scale genome wide analysis, have found no indication of a significant Khazar genetic contribution to the Ashkenazi population. The genetic data points to a common ancestry with other Jewish groups and a primary origin in the Middle East and Europe. Historical and genetic evidence suggests that even if any Khazars converted to Judaism, it was likely a limited number of elite individuals, not a large scale conversion that would have a significant genetic impact on the population. Now, of course, if anybody says, Steve, the AI is rigged, I mean, after all, we live in an era of obsession over Jewish conspiracy theories. So let's say that somebody watching this video is dismissive of the AI and says, well, Steve, you're using Google AI and the Jews run that. Well, I'm going to now turn to none other than probably the leading anti Semite in contemporary America, and that being David Duke. Why am I turning to him? Because David Duke was one of the original proponents and disseminators of that whole Khazar theory. He ran with it because it was so convenient to his narrative that today's Israelis are not the Semites of old, the Semites from the Bible, but rather a fraud. Okay, but here in the article that he published back in November of 2016, he himself renounces the Khazar theory that he played such a crucial role in disseminating. So I thought it was worthwhile to read a little bit from David Duke's own renunciation of the Khazar theory. And what's funny about it is when I encounter people on X or TikTok still disseminating this Khazar theory, I always tell them, look, even your leader, David Duke, even one of your leading thinkers has renounced it, and therefore you need to update your own anti Semitism. Okay, so we're going to read part of this article. When I first began to understand the ultra racist, supremacist ideology of Judaism and Zionism, I came into contact with the theory that present day Jews are genetically unrelated to the historical Jewish community. The allegation known as the Khazar theory claims that the Ashkenazi Jews of today are actually descendants of the Khazar people, a Central Asiatic nomadic tribe that allegedly converted to Judaism in the 9th century AD. It is claimed that these newly minted Jews then migrated into what is now Russia, Eastern Europe, and later Western and Northern Europe. The theory is also used to advance the idea that Jewish actions or character are not genetic or racial because the Khazar people adopted the Talmudic values of Sephardic and other Jews who were unrelated to them. For years, I accepted the Khazar theory is true. After all, it was repeated by some writers who also recognized the leading Jewish role in communism and their leadership in many other subversive movements. It was only later, when I considered the question logically and scientifically, where my doubts about the Khazar theory aroused. One thing that I did not know then was that Kessler, the communist Jew who popularized the Khazar theory, bragged in a Jewish magazine that he had advanced the theory as a way to fight against anti-Semitism. His theory was that since the Gospels and Europeans blamed Jews for the crucifixion of Jesus, if he could make Europeans believe that they are not related by blood to the Christ killer Jews talked about in the New Testament, that he could lessen hatred against Jews. One must remember, until the Jewish triumph of Christian Zionism, 99% of Christianity viewed Jews as the greatest enemies of Jesus Christ and God, as the New Testament makes very, very clear. So in those days, some Jews, such as Kessler, saw an advantage to say that the Jews were not actually related to the Jews who crucified Christ and so persecuted Christians. scaling down here. There are three fundamental issues which need to be addressed: the scientific evidence, the historical logical evidence, and the reasons why the Khazar theory came about. Now, here, as we scroll down the article, David Duke accurately reproduces here a list of the leading genetic studies by some of the leading academic institutions of the world. Okay, all of them, for the most part, discounting entirely this whole Khazar theory. Okay, look at this long list. Overwhelmingly, the data has it so that Ashkenazi Jews really are the descendants of ancient Middle Eastern people. Now, this is funny. Here, David Duke reproduces photographic evidence. Okay, now we went over the Nazi era photographic or illustrative evidence relating to Jews as Semites. Here, David Duke contributes his version of it. Okay, he's got a profile picture of Barbara Streisand with her obviously Semitic nose, Semitic profile in comparison to this ancient Semitic figure, okay, above. These two illustrations make the point even more dramatically. On the left, the Ashkenazi Jewess Barbara Streisand in 1966, and on the right, a Jewish leader of Israelite trade delegation is portrayed on a mural on the wall of the 18th century dynasty from 1400 BC, the tomb of Sobekotep, Tutmosis or Tutmos the fourth in Egypt. 2,000 years before the alleged Khazar conversion, and they look the same as modern-day Ashkenazi Jews. So here, David Duke, again, employing this illustration to show that we are indeed Semites in his total recant of the Khazar theory that he previously championed. And as we continue to go down here, okay, now he's showing us on the right the photograph of the modern day leader of the Anti-Defamation League, or let's say he's the former leader of the Anti-Defamation League. He retired. I'm not even sure he's still alive, but this is Abe Foxman here on the right, and he's being compared to the sculpture surviving from Pompeii of the Jewish Pompeian banker Jucundus, okay, who lived sometime between 20 and 62 A.D. And here David Duke makes sure we know that's 700 years before the alleged Ashkenazi conversion. So I don't think that's as clear as the Barbara Streisand one. Okay, but here it's David Duke's second attempt to show through illustration here in photographs that we, the Jews today, are indeed Semites, not Khazars. Okay, so much for the David Duke article here. You're free, of course, to read it at length. It's a long article, but David Duke himself, one of the leaders of contemporary American anti-Semitism, is totally renouncing this whole Khazar theory of the origins of Ashkenazi Jews as the rubbish that it is. Now, you would think that David Duke, in recognizing that we, the Jews, descend from ancient Israel, would therefore have some sort of reverence for those roots, but he doesn't. Okay, he goes on in the article to say why the Jews, the true stock Jews, which are all the Jews going back to the ancient Near East, are basically this awful, evil race. And what makes us evil is that we're guided and led by this sense of Jewish supremacy compared to all other races that inhabit the earth, and that ultimately we want to subjugate all other races under our Jewish supremacy. Well, there it is, folks. We've taken quite a journey over the past 50 minutes from Nazi-era Germany into our day to see the total flip-flop on this issue. Are Ashkenazi Jews like yours truly, Steve the tour guide, real Jews who descend back to the ancient stock of Judah and Israel in the Bible? The answer we saw in the very beginning of the video, according to genetic studies, was resoundingly yes. Admittedly, there was some admixture with the peoples that we live with for the past several centuries, hence, my blue eyes or whatever other contributions from that admixture I have. But according to genetic studies, at the core of things, we still remain largely descendants of that ancient Levantine people group called the Israelites. And we have more genetic material in common with fellow Jews wherever those other Jews were dispersed around the world than with the host populations among the peoples we live with for the past few centuries, whether they're Germans, Poles, Russians, Iraqis, Persians, Moroccans. At the end of the day, it's a testimony to the faithfulness of God to preserve exactly as he said he would in his word the Jewish people until this latter day. And folks, at the end of the day, that's what this entire assault on Jewish legitimacy is all about. It's about unbelievers, although unfortunately among them, misguided professing Christians from traditional streams of Christianity, okay, largely Catholicism or Greek Orthodoxy or Russian Orthodoxy. Doesn't mean that all those people are bad, but it means that unfortunately their churches over time have not taught them this truth that's written all over the Hebrew Bible, that larger portion of the Bible, that God was to preserve the Jews wherever he scattered us to until the time of his sovereign choosing, which is the day that we live in today, to call us back to the land of Israel, because our being preserved until this day and being reestablished in the land of Israel is central to the redemption plan of God for the world, and central, therefore, to the events that define the closing of this current age we live in before that messianic reign of the Messiah or Jesus here on earth. So at the end of the day, it's not even about race, it's not about genetics, it's not about any of that. There has been, since October 7, 2023, a heightened attack on the Jews, on Israel, on scripture. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who call themselves Christians that are not immersed in the scripture, and therefore they're easily misled by the Pied Pipers of our day. Anyway, that's it for this episode. If you want to treat Steve the tour guide to a cup of coffee, if you enjoyed this study, let's celebrate it over a cup of coffee, and you can do so by donating to my coffee treasury, if you will, that I link to the bottom of each of my videos in the extended description of the video, that link to my coffee page. I want to thank all of you who have been so generous over the past couple months for treating me to a lot of cups of coffee. And with that said, I want to wish all of you a happy, happy continuation of the holiday season. I guess Christmas is what? It's about 2 weeks away, so I'm sure you'll see me on another video before that holiday. But until that next episode, I want to wish you well. Enjoy the rest of the week in whatever you're doing and wherever you're doing it. This is Steve the Tour Guide signing off. Bye-bye.